And I'm now going to move on to Susie Moxley, as we do call Susie. And Susie, thank you for all your energy you put into this. And Susie is a woman of many talents. From printmaker, this is her studio at the bottom of her garden, which if you get in fast now, you don't get to go to the studio, but you can see her Art Week exhibitions in her house. What a privilege that things are opening up. Susie makes jewelry and often spends time in Greece. And I know that that's a time which is really creative for her, where she can spend time on whether it's her art or whether it's her jewelry. And not to be idle, she has also done some stained glass windows, and this was for the museum, a museum in Reading. The other thing, she exhibits regularly, and this was at the Affordable Art Fair. We're going to hear more about this from Susie in her answer to the questions. And again, a woman of many talents, as I say, and she was the designer of this book cover, which was a Booker Prize winner. And she doesn't know I was going to put this in. Susie, I do know, as Esther said as well, that you were the one to start the Art Forum in Summertown 18 years ago. And what a lovely richness it brings. There's so many things that happen in Oxfordshire Art Weeks. And we are delighted to be here this evening. Susie has many other, she's often political in her art, and I have the privilege of going on walks with her and would ask her, well, hang on, where does that come from? And so understand that there is usually a history. For example, crossing the Aegean was about refugees crossing the Aegean Ocean. And this was an exhibition of 100 portraits. Tom, not to be in competition to you, this was a number of years ago, as we know. And not only that, the challenging part, Susie at the same time had a challenging diagnosis herself and did numerous pieces of art about having breast cancer and a mastectomy, and how a surgeon might see this. So Susie, we are delighted to be asking you, looking back, how have you responded to COVID? And then, as you know, we will move on to the next question. Susie, over to you.
Well, thanks, Diane. I'm going to tell you about the weekend before lockdown, when I was exhibiting at the Affordable Art Fair in London. It's the most exciting place because it's a huge, great big hall, and it's really exciting to watch this place getting filled up with artwork, and also the anticipation of the reaction of people to my own work. But last year there was a foreboding atmosphere at the fair. There was a nervous energy on the preview night. The public flocked in and no one quite knew whether they should kiss each other or touch elbows or shake hands, or we were still unmasked at that stage. And the sales at the opening night reflected this nervous energy. It was like a sort of a frenzied last feast. People were going crazy and they were buying like mad. And it was a little bit like 3 weeks later, or the next week actually, when people were going into the supermarkets and filling up their trolleys with loo rolls and paracetamol and the last bags of flour from the shelves. But COVID had already been around for about 4 months. And now it was a pandemic. It had been declared as a pandemic. And people were dying in China and Europe and America and Africa and here in the UK. At the end of the weekend, as it went on, it became obvious that we were in denial. We all bent over our telephones. There were few and few people coming into the fair, but we couldn't get out of the fair quick enough. But closing down a fair at the best of times is pretty chaotic. There are trucks that are being loaded up in the dark, and the order that you arrive with, everything is neat and tidy when you arrive. And when you leave, it's chaotic. There's badly wrapped pictures and there's sort of loose boxes of screws and bubble wrap that you trip on. And it was just chaotic. We just couldn't wait to get out. Lockdown actually was announced 3 days later, and COVID was about to now reveal that our freedom, our personal freedom was no longer, and that we were going to be, our normality was going to be taken away. And I realized that all of my future planned exhibitions, which I had already planned for that year, had to be cancelled. But mostly, I just felt that making art seemed irrelevant and totally pointless. But anyway, I went back into my studio and I made some rather large, frightened and angry marks on a colograph plate. Diane, if you show the first slide. When I printed this picture, I noticed that the marks looked a little bit like the round coronavirus shapes. So I began a conversation with this work. I added to the shapes, and then I noticed that they seemed to be floating around a little bit. I added color, and I gave it space, and I gave it movement, and I turned the paper upside down, and I cut it up and I rearranged the pieces, sometimes making the picture balanced and then unbalancing it. The picture became larger and larger. There just didn't seem to be enough space because I had so much to talk about, and it just kept growing and growing. And this was the result. And I think it's rather confused and frightened and intangible. So I called the picture Viral Confusion. In the next picture, this is a picture called Contained Virus. I tried to contain my feelings, to put them into a bowl or a container, but I couldn't grab hold of them. It was almost as though the feelings were just slipping about. There was just no certainty at all. Then on our morning walks, I noticed that the streets were littered with gloves and masks. I inked up some gloves and some masks and I put them through my press. Despite the news of suffering and death, there was so much humor and creativity happening in lockdown. People were posting videos of doing silly things and singing in the empty streets. So I had my gloves playing cat's cradles. I called this piece, Look After Your PPE. It felt like the air that we were breathing was polluted. We were all filtering it through masks. So I made RNA sky, if you show that next picture, Di. The clouds here became twisted RNA of the coronavirus, ominously hanging over what was rather a drippy, undefined ground. I realized that the Greek word, I was studying Greek at the same time, the Greek word for inspiration is epneome, literally meaning to take in the spirit or the atmosphere or the breath. And I was inspired by the confusion and the fear and the intangibility of the time of COVID. And I think I responded by making a body of work that was free of the usual restraints of having to exhibit or to sell your work. And I think it became very pure and very raw in a way. So that was my inspiration of the time of COVID.
Susie, fascinating. And I really enjoy understanding what's behind your pictures. And so thank you for sharing that. I must say the cat's cradle and the PPE. I did have friends when I told them about your picture, they said, did Susie pick up the gloves? So Susie, you'll have to, when you tell us next, you'll have to tell us about that. And so Susie, now looking ahead, as you know, the question is what or how are you going to carry this forward?
Oh, it's a long story. Well, I grew up in South Africa, and you know, I never understood all my life. My father talked about picnicking on a precipice, but I never quite knew what it was that he was talking about. But now it seems that in this fragile world, that's exactly what we're doing. We're picnicking on a precipice. Because the virus has filled us with fear and taken the lives of so many people. The environment is in a knife edge. Jobs are threatened. AI, fake news, the noise of the internet is bombarding us. Black Lives Matter, Me Too, homelessness, movement and displacement of people. COVID, there is just so much. But we're being challenged in so many ways. But somehow, somewhere, we each have to find our own way out of this. I grew up in South Africa, one of the most beautiful countries in the world. My childhood was privileged. My father was an architect. He designed a house near a thick bush of wattle trees that was full of vervet monkeys. We had to wade through the stream to get past the stink bug trees to get there, and the bullfrogs kept us awake at night. But South Africa was politically unspeakable. As a child, I knew little of what was happening. I didn't understand when my dad said picnicking on a precipice, because my concern at that time as a little girl at school was school. because I couldn't read, and I was laughed at and I was teased. So why am I telling you the story? Because I discovered the wonderful world of creativity, a world where I could lose myself and I could imagine. I spent hours mucking around in my dad's workshop or molding clay that I found in the stream. I loved drawing in the depths of looking that you had to do to copy a tree or a flower. I learned that there was another way of communicating other than reading and writing. And years later, when my children were small and I had no time to do my own work, when they were finally asleep at the end of the day and I felt totally washed up and exhausted, I remember sitting under a palm tree, staring at a palm frond that had fallen in the wind. I took it and I stripped it and I started to weave. And as I did it, I could feel a calmness and also an excitement as the shape developed in front of me. I wove and I bent and I twisted the leaves. I don't remember exactly what I was making. I think it was the process and the challenge of doing that was so exciting and that relaxed me. The sculpture I made, in fact, was of a woman skipping and her hair blowing in the wind. Di, I think you can show that picture. Anyway, I'm deviating again, but what I'm trying to describe is the restorative power of creativity and the power that art communicates without words. It's such a basic human need, a healing need that goes beyond language. 2,500 years ago, the Greeks seemed to understand this. They built at Epidavros a hospital and an athletic stadium and the wonderful amphitheater, all on the same site in the most beautiful natural setting, because they believed that sports and arts and culture and nature should all be seen together equally, of equal value in healing the body and the mind together. So I think we should never, ever accept that art doesn't count, that it is something that we only do in our spare time, that museums and galleries should never be called non-essential, and that they should never be closed again as they have been in lockdown, because art offers imagination and a different perspective, humor and a reflection to see the world differently. The next slide, Di. I would like my COVID-inspired pictures, this is one of them, with all their confusion and loneliness and fear and intangibility, to be seen and shared, to reassure and to confirm that it's okay to feel vulnerable in a world that is crashing around us. If we hide from the real tough things in the world, we'll never ever learn from them. COVID has really given me the inspiration to confront my own feelings in a world that is threatened and allowed me to imagine, to see the humor and hope. So looking forward, what will I take with me? I think it has to be the wonderful healing, restorative power of art and creativity and imagination as we picnic on this very edge of our current precipice.